everybody, and welcome back to the Crash Formula One podcast. Well, McLaren have done it. They have clinched their second Constructors' Championship in a row after a brilliant performance in Singapore. But that will not be the biggest talking point after this weekend with McLaren. The reality is, the biggest talking point is going to be the clash between championship rivals Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, as it looks like it's the end of papaya rules. And an absolutely stunning performance from George Russell to romp home to victory, which does beg the question, why has he not signed a contract with Mercedes yet? Well, Lucas, tons to talk about from the Singapore weekend, albeit it was kind of a dull race at times. But what did you make of the weekend overall anyway to start?
Well, qualifying was definitely more interesting than the race was. The race itself, I'm sure many people will agree, was a bit of a boring one. A lot of the interesting parts of the race arose from intra-team drama from McLaren. There were a few sparkling little performances in there and a few funny moments, especially from Fernando Alonso. But in a race where they were trialling these new cooling vests, it's immediately clear that there was no cooling going to the heads of the drivers, was there? There were quite a few very valid crash outs from up and down the grid. So, yeah, plenty to unpack there. It's just a shame that the on-track action itself didn't quite keep up with the expectations we have for Singapore Grand Prix of past.
Yeah, I think Singapore is usually a good race, and it was a little bit disappointing, but I think it, points to a larger question about the racing this year, I think. We're at the end of this regulation cycle now. We're not seeing cars being upgraded as much as they were in years past, and the focus is obviously on next year, and I think that has affected the racing slightly. That being said, Lucas, as you said, plenty of on-track action, so I think we should just really get into it. Of course, McLaren have walked away with their second Constructors' title in a row. The team will obviously be elated with that. It's great news for everybody back at the MTC. They'll get a nice big bonus this year, but it was definitely marred in controversy, which I guess is what we like to see, of course, between the two drivers, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. Oscar, of course, qualified third in the race, and Lando Norris qualified fifth, but managed to get up into that podium position within the first lap of the race after a somewhat controversial move. After Lando got the move done, he held on to the position throughout the race, but there was a lot of back and forth on the radio with Oscar Piastri, and it seems to point that this is where the issue is with papaya rules. I think it has finally come crumbling down on the team. I do think this is the end of them trying to keep both of their drivers happy. First, let's just get into the performances from both the drivers, Lucas. I guess we need to start with Lando. He knew that he only had one opportunity to make that move, really, and it was within that first lap. I think I've been quite critical of Lando at times throughout the season. I don't think he's been aggressive enough and shown that he has wanted to win this championship at times. This was refreshing. I felt that it was a real moment where it was Lando discovering that this is what I need to do and I'm not going to leave anything on the table, whether the championship is out of the question or not, which it very much is still alive in my eyes. It was a controversial move. I think that the stewards immediately decided not to investigate it. There was a little bit of wheel bumping, but ultimately, it's a lap one incident. The stewards do show a little bit of leniency in that, just with the amount of cars that are going through the different turns. So I think it made sense for them not to investigate it. It was hard racing. Lando was very, very quick to say afterwards that this is just racing. It was fair. Yeah, maybe it was a little bit on the line, but ultimately, this is what racing is, and I did what I had to do, which was very different from Lando of old, I think, to even be talking that way. So what did you think of Lando's performance and how Oscar reacted to it then as a result, Lucas?
Well, I think, to be honest, even just before we get onto the race itself, Lando's performance in qualifying was almost nowhere to be found. I don't necessarily think we would have seen such a controversial move, let's say, had Lando managed to actualize the performance of that car on Saturday. However, when it came to the race itself, yes, indeed, it was definitely refreshing to see Lando get his elbows out a little bit. The whole papaya rules thing being, well, Oscar's been on the record saying there aren't really any papaya rules, it's only just the one, and that's don't crash into each other. Didn't quite adhere to that, so maybe, yeah, papaya rules is over. But yeah, I am glad to see him take a bit of a riskier move, but in doing so, he did manage to collide with two drivers simultaneously, which arguably caused harm to his car. And yes, he did get the move done early on, gaining 2 places, first lap, great. But it could be argued that that did harm the performance of the car later on in the race. And we saw, especially towards the end of the race, we saw a bit of a return to the Lando of old that we know, in that he just couldn't seem to get the move done. It was 10, 20 laps long, that battle, and yet nothing really became of it. There were one or two decent attempts, but even then I saw that it was him trying to sneak down the inside of Max, which is not really the way you can overtake that guy, because he sees it all coming. The only way you can really get past Max, at least in my opinion, is to force some sort of mistake and then get him on the exit, or think of something a little bit more creative than a simple dive bomb, because Max is really good at that himself, and he will see it coming from a mile back. But focusing back on Lando, it is refreshing to see him get his elbows out a little bit. The difference between them still sits at 22 points. So there's still definitely some work to be done. And if this is what it takes, then this is what it takes. I'm all for a more exciting end to what, in my honest opinion, has been one of the more boring driver title fights of the last few years. So if it gets more interesting, then I'm absolutely all for it, just as long as it doesn't get too dangerous.
Yeah, I think to go back to your point, Lucas, it's a good point that Lando was really behind the pace in qualifying. He didn't look sharp at all throughout the weekend. Even throughout practice, there was a few glimpses of speed, but it just really didn't feel like they were putting the laps together throughout the qualifying session as well. That being said, Oscar was happy with his qualifying position. Lando was definitely disappointed with his. And I think, as you say, this was like a nice, refreshing turn to see Lando say, I'm not just going to accept that this was my performance on Saturday and just let that hang out then on Sunday. He went for it then on the Sunday. And ultimately, what he's trying to do is get the points deficit down, even if that is a couple of points at a time. He's managed to now get it down to 22 points to Oscar Piastri. So it's all to play for going into these next few races, with the sprints going in there as well. And Lando, I think, is, of course, very, very cognizant to the fact that Max is taking away points from the two of them as well. And Max is a threat to both of them. But Max being a threat to Lando is also a benefit in the fact that he's a threat to Oscar as well. So he is finally, it's like something has finally clicked, I think, with Lando, and he really wants to push it now right to the limit. But as you say, this has exposed the main issues with papaya rules. And as you said, Lucas, papaya rules is don't crash into each other, which you could argue was pretty much broken this weekend and then ignored. And we heard Oscar on the radio immediately basically saying, is this okay now? Is this what we're allowed to do now? I don't really think this is fair. This is good teamwork, essentially. But it speaks to the wider issue at McLaren as well, that they have tried so hard to keep both of those drivers happy. And ultimately, that is not going to work at some point. You would also assume at some point they would have had to make the decision where, I mean, as I said, because Lando is still in the championship fight, there has to be a level of we are backing a driver at some point. And at this point in the championship, you would have potentially thought that Oscar would be getting that treatment. It's clearly not the case. They did not feel it was necessary to ask either of them to switch positions at any point. It was very much just head down, Oscar. We'll talk about it after. We'll see what happens. Go try get him. And as you said, there was about 20 or so laps there where there was a bit of infighting between the two of them, but it didn't really look like Oscar was going to get that opportunity to get ahead of Lando at any point. I think it is the nature of the track as well. We didn't see that much overtaking throughout Singapore too. He did get frustrated behind Lando, but every credit to Lando for holding on to the position. And then also Lando had a really good stint towards the end chasing down Max, and we'll get on to Max's performance later on, which I think was also a massive highlight of the weekend too. But we did see that Lando was chasing down a Max with struggling with car issues as well. So there was pace in that McLaren towards the end of the race. It's just now going to be very, very difficult for what the team decides to do. They have won the Constructors now, so all bets are off. It's down to the two drivers now. And at this point, I think because it's been disregarded this weekend, and I don't necessarily think it was the wrong thing to do. I'm backing actually Lando's decision here to do this and put himself first over Lando. But now this is just the awkward question for the team. It's been disregarded. So now Oscar is going to look at that weekend and say, I'm not going to have any loyalty to anybody throughout the next few races. And because they won the Constructors, there is nothing to lose on a team's perspective. They don't need to get the team on side really anymore. Obviously, they want to have the benefit of winning the championship, but Oscar will have also be looking at that weekend and saying, I had this poor pit stop. Everything was going against me from the team. I've got nothing. I've had no thanks really for what I've done for the team up to now. And I've been arguably the better driver throughout the season. So, where does this leave McLaren and Lucas? How do they handle these next few races? Is it just complete step back or what?
I mean, this weekend has kind of exposed the circus that is McLaren racing at the moment. It's quite sad. I mean, uh, from even from the start, right? We saw a very un-Oscar Piastri like race for Oscar in that there was several moments where he was on the radio going, what the hell is going on, guys? There was clearly a bit of a break wherein he'd realized, right, this is we've passed the era of niceties now. We need to prioritize who we want to prioritize, and for Oscar, he wants to prioritize himself, as he should. And you're right, he has been the stronger driver over the course of the season, so why hasn't he been prioritized? We also had the part wherein Lando was out front and we had his engineer come over the radio and say, Oscar needs to pit to cover Charles. Are you happy with letting him pit first? Which, again, really confusing. Why would you ask another driver if they wanted to prioritize their teammate? The default rule should be the driver out in front on track has pit priority. It's always been that way for the last 100 years. So don't entirely understand why we're getting Lando on the horn to say, do you want to give Oscar this pit? And Lando even sounded a bit incredulous on the radio. He accidentally answered yes and then went, hang on a minute, no, what? And then obviously we have the pit fiasco at McLaren again. This was almost a mirror image of Monza, wherein we had Lando get out with a 2.1 second stop. We went, whoa, that was insane. And then in comes Oscar and has to sit there for 5, which, again, if Oscar had had a sharper stop, he probably would have been right up Lando's wazoo towards the end of the race. It's an absolute mess, to be honest, and it really is starting to get on my nerves. And when the driver that you are prioritizing, even if it is on a race by race basis, when the driver you are prioritizing can't convert that advantage into something meaningful, it's very disillusioning. As for where they go moving forwards, honestly, I have no idea. I do understand Oscar's frustration. I mean, we saw at the end of the race, at least it's definitely been reported, that he stuck around for the message from his race engineer, thanks the team, thanked the engineers, and then when Zach came on, he got about halfway through his message before the radio was disconnected, which, I get it. I do get it, because if we're all this frustrated, I can only imagine what it's like to be a driver at that team. And we've all seen the stills from after the race as well, where Oscar looks absolutely fuming. It's all to play for, and you're right that Max is still there waiting for both of them to implode such that he can pick up the pieces and potentially run away with this again. I mean, it's important not to forget that, I'm sure we'll get onto this in a little bit, but Max was again in front of both of them. So yeah, I don't know, man. There's not much they can do at this point. It's just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, and it's definitely starting to show.
I agree completely. I mean, the big issue as well with McLaren is, I suppose from a team perspective, you can relate to that, where they just want to keep a bit of harmony. It's a massive organization where they want to be successful and win championships and races, of course. So from their perspective, they're just looking at it as, we just want to maintain harmony and just let them race. But as viewers, we want to see a bit of fireworks. We want to see a bit of a clash. And I do agree that this has been one of the more boring championship bids, I think, because they've played it so nicely up to this point. And I don't think that's Lando or Oscar's fault. It's that they've had to play it nicely up to this point. Neither of them have been in a championship fight before with each other. And so this is that first time that this is happening, and it will not be the same next year. I can guarantee that. It will be knives out a lot more, which as viewers, we want to see that. There's been championship fights between teammates in the past that have been absolute box office to watch, and that is what we want. And I do think that we will start to get that a bit more over the next few races, and as I said, next year will be a lot more fiery. From the McLaren perspective, I can see why they've tried to play it this way. Ultimately, they're still a team that wants to see the success they have, and it has somewhat worked up until now, but it was always going to end this way. I think everyone had said that initially. It was always going to end in this position.
That's the thing I don't quite understand, because at the end of the day, from a team perspective, yes, you want them to be able to play nice. But the only thing that matters, is that they both finish the race in as high a position as possible. They shouldn't care what the order is. They shouldn't care what the rivalry is between the drivers. They get the same amount of points if Lando finishes first or if Oscar finishes first. Where things start to get really confused is where they pursue this farce of fairness and equality to the point at which they are altering driver positions, they are changing pit strategies, and they are asking different drivers whether they want to concede the advantage to their teammate, which that shouldn't matter to the team. The only thing that matters is where they finish, right? When you get into when your priorities for the constructors championship start to impede on individual drivers championship bids, that's when things start to get frustrating. That's where you start to see this intra-team fighting, this friction that the team never really should have interfered with in the first place. As long as they're not hitting each other, rest in peace papaya rules, then it should all be fine, which is what's really frustrating, both for the drivers and for us viewing, and it's taking a lot of the fun out of the Drivers' Championship, which it should never have in the first place.
Yeah, I think you've hit on a really good point there, where ultimately papaya rules to the public has been don't bump into each other. That is the only rule. But it goes so much deeper than that. That all the discussions that they're having before races, it's very obvious that there is a clear conversation that happens before every race where they're trying to have this equitable split between the two drivers, and ultimately it will never work because, as you see, there will be a bad pit stop one week, there will be a DNF one week, there will be an engine failure one week. So you're trying to control things that actually you can't control. And I think that that was at one point over Lando's or over Oscar's radio, I believe his engineer said, let's control what we can control. But McLaren are the masters of trying to control things that they can't control either. And they've shot themselves in the foot completely, I think. That being said, look, at the end of the day, they're still the most successful team this year. They won the Constructors. They don't see this as a failure at all. It isn't a failure. It is massive success for the team, and they should be lauded for that. And we've said before in the past, Lucas, that they are a really good racing outfit. They just look like a really tight racing outfit on race weekends. But then when things like this happen, they look silly. They look stupid. And it takes away from all the hard work they've done to build a really competitive car, have two really strong drivers, and make really good strategy calls because they're tying themselves into knots about the two drivers. It's going to be really, really interesting. And as you said, I think very much so that Max is still in this. And if we have this squabbling, do we get a Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso situation, and then Kimi Raikkonen comes in and wins the championship by a point at the end? It's very possible that that could happen too. So it really
100%.
depends on how they play this now over the next few months and few races. That being said, I think it's going to be more entertainment for us. We're going to enjoy it either way.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, yes, it's undeniable that they have delivered results, right? They've won the Constructors' Championship. They've tied Red Bull's record for winning the Constructors' Championship with 6 races left on the calendar. Fair enough. And from a short-term, a short-term perspective, that makes a lot of sense. But it's going to start to harm long-term repeatability of that kind of performance, because at the end of the day, all you're doing is turning two drivers against each other in a way that is artificial and manufactured. It may have happened regardless, considering how close the battle is, but what is the battle that close because they keep interfering? And if it is, the chances of these drivers wanting to put in or being able to put in this kind of performance and wanting to continue to do so at this team diminishes as the years go on, right? I know they're both under contract and they're long-term contracts at that, but they do have exit clauses. And I'm sure most of those clauses are performance related, but even still, if you foster this kind of a bitter environment within the team, even if it's all sunshines and rainbows and results on the outside, within the next 1, 2, 3 years, the likelihood of being able to repeat those results diminishes dramatically. And I think that's something that they really, really should be paying attention to, because if it doesn't change, if they don't rectify this infighting, then it's inevitable.
Yeah, I think you've touched on something really interesting there in that McLaren have always been so confident in their driver lineup, and this is where danger starts to, excuse me, this is where danger looms around every corner. You do start to see that drivers will just get fed up of the situation that they are in and they will look elsewhere. And McLaren has been, I think, almost too comfortable in their driver lineup. I think once they're giving them a championship winning car, both drivers will want to be there. But if there is a hint of competitiveness elsewhere or treatment elsewhere that they want to move aside, it will happen. So I think it's fine for now. But the fact that, as you said, because they both have long term deals, they both feel just as secure in that team as the other one does. And so when Oscar feels hard done by this weekend, his attitude will be, well, I've given loads to this team already. Sure, he hasn't been there as long as Lando has, and Lando was always their project over the years. But Oscar has performed fantastically this year, and I'm sure he'll be thinking, what more can I do for you guys? I'm trying to win the Drivers' Championship here. I've done everything you need me to do. So I do think that there is going to be a big change in his attitude going forward, and it'll be really one to watch over the next few races. But we need to jump on, of course, Lucas, elsewhere and discuss race winner George Russell. I mean, what a fantastic performance from him, both throughout qualifying and throughout the race. I mean, I think that was a fantastic qualifying lap from George. It really set him above the pack. Mercedes did look, pretty competitive throughout the weekend, which was good to see. They are comfortable on this track, which is interesting. And it looked like that George was always going to be in the pack, but he just set that pole lap and no one really was going to challenge him throughout it. Yes, it looked at times that, maybe the McLarens might have been up there at some point, but I mean, as you say, Lando wasn't really there. Oscar was trailing behind. Max was looking pretty sharp as well. He did abandon his final push lap, blaming that on Lando Norris, which I think kind of got forgotten about after Saturday pretty quickly because of all the drama, but that was kind of another interesting take from Max. But let's just stick on to George for the moment. I mean, one, he had a bit of an anonymous race. He just went out there and controlled the race. It was completely dominance on his side. But what does this say? I mean, we keep talking about it, Lucas, but why have Mercedes not signed George yet? Is it a case where they're going to offer him maybe a 2+1 kind of deal, and George is saying, like, look, you need to commit to me now for long-term contract? He's looking at his peers. He's looking at Lando. He's looking at Charles. He's looking at Oscar and going, these guys all have long-term deals with their teams. They're building a project. Why am I not getting that? And maybe that's where the conflict is arising from. But it just does feel so weird that I think if I was Mercedes, I would be chomping at the bit to get him signed and locked down for the next few years.
I think they probably are, to be honest. I mean, it's far from the first time we've seen this sort of tentativeness when it comes to contractual agreements happening behind the scenes in Formula One. It really could be anything. George's performance has been undeniable. His enthusiasm, perhaps less so. I don't know if you remember his reaction to his pole position. It was sort of just okay. Great. And we got a few woos and ahs out of him at the end of the race, so I guess that's a little bit better. Perhaps that does speak to how things are going behind the scenes with Merck. I have no idea, but I don't suspect that this could. I do suspect that this could go on for a little bit longer into the season and perhaps towards the end of it, to be honest. Again, we don't really see any options that could replace George at the moment. Everyone seems pretty well settled in, so unless they go for something completely left field, like taking the recently freed up Alex Dunn and putting him in a Formula One seat, which I think would be exceedingly unlikely, I reckon it's signed, sealed, delivered. It's probably just details behind the scenes. But going back to his performance on track, it was quite masterful, wasn't it? I mean, he started first, he finished first, he led pretty much all of it, and just kept a cool head, as George does. No real complaints from his end. He just sort of disappeared into the distance by about lap 10. Lap 15, I think he was 5-6 seconds ahead of Max, and it was just plain sailing from there on out. So, yeah, absolute props to him, and pretty much no notes from me. Yeah, just a masterclass.
Yeah, he never looked at any doubt of losing that position whatsoever. It was really impressive from him. And as you said, kept a cool head as well. I mean, I think it needs to be really underpinned that this is a very difficult race and how challenging it is. I mean, we saw last year in particular, the drivers really did struggle with the heat. We kind of didn't see that as much this year, although I'm sure the drivers were in bits after the race, but it was very evident last year because they were talking about it a lot more last year. I think they managed it really, really well this year, but for George to put in a performance like that in these challenging conditions where it's such an unforgiving track as well, even the slightest mistake can just be absolutely catastrophic, and he was just really, really comfortable, and he was really comfortable all throughout the weekend. I mean, what you said as well about his enthusiasm, I think that maybe reflects the fact that he doesn't have a contract next year. I think that George Russell is the kind of guy that tries very hard and he doesn't make any bones of that. He makes it look like he's putting in the work every weekend, and I like that about him. I think that's a really admirable trait of a driver. He really shows that, yeah, I'm going to be unapologetically like working really, really hard to do this, and that's what I really like about George. And I think that having that kind of lingering kind of, I wonder, is it a you guys don't really appreciate what I'm doing here? There was also quite of a weird moment on the broadcast, trying not to look too much into it, Lucas, when George got his pole position, but Toto Wolff didn't look that happy. He kind of just was
No.
pretty expressionless, which, I mean, look, maybe we shouldn't read too much into these things. We don't know what he was watching on his monitor, but typically when your driver is in pole position, you're clapping or smiling at least. So it was quite weird, I have to say. It's definitely it's confusing me about what's going on over at Mercedes at the moment.
Yeah, you and me both. I mean, who knows? Maybe he was watching the feed from Andrea Kimi Antonelli, who has not been able to match George's performance once this year. Who knows? To be honest, it really could be anything. But yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I mean that's probably a fair point about Kimi Antonelli as well. He wants to see him improve. I mean, didn't have a bad qualifying, didn't have a brilliant race. I think he keeps falling short a little bit. I think he's just doing fine. So it only just complements George's driving more, really, to be honest with you. So be interesting to see what happens there. Now, Max Verstappen, Lucas, we need to talk about him. I mean, again, another one with a bit of an anonymous race up until the kind of the end. Fantastic qualifying performance from him. He obviously backed out of his last lap and said basically that Lando was driving too slowly ahead of him and was going to impede the end of his lap. I mean, it was kind of a weird thing to say, I think.
Mm.
Looking at the footage back, I think that Lando was pretty far ahead and shouldn't have caused any issues with Max finishing the lap, basically. Whether or not Max was going to improve on that lap is still really unsure in that last sector, but he backed out, put the blame on Lando in a kind of a cryptic way in the post qualifying interview at first when he was asked, who was it that you're talking about here? He said, well, not Oscar. And then in the press conference after, immediately he was like, yeah, it was Lando I was talking about, basically. I think it was a bit weird for him to kind of put the blame on that there, and it kind of got forgotten about then. But then his race was pretty impressive, I have to say. He was struggling with issues with the car all throughout the race as well, which I still think was an impressive performance from him despite quite a poor start. He still managed to hold on to the position. He was struggling with issues and saying the car was really, really difficult to drive. He was pretty angry on the radio a couple of times, but he held on to the position. Obviously, there was that kind of last minute charge from Lando Norris as well. Still managed to hold him off and keep P2. So it's just another brilliant performance from the reigning world champion that keeps him in contention, isn't it, Lucas?
Yep. I mean, as you say, it was an interesting time for him. I mean, he felt like he was a little bit nowhere in the race. I mean, like you say, anonymous, not necessarily nowhere. He still finished P2. But going back to qualifying, perhaps it was that sour spot between having the toe and being in dirty air that was getting on his nerves a little bit. But again, it's pretty tough to assign any actual proper blame to Lando, at least not in the traditional definition of impeding someone's lap, wherein they would be blocking someone sitting on the apex or something silly like that. But when it comes to the race itself, yeah, he put in a perfectly fine performance. He was the highest on the grid to have a bit of a crash out at the team in the car. I think at one point he said it felt like his brake bias felt like he had a handbrake for when he was entering corners, which okay, fine, but he still managed to keep his head on and stick to P2, which, great. Wasn't anywhere close to challenging George. And hey, maybe that has something to do with the cooling vest thing. We never know. We know for a fact that George did use the vest throughout the race, and Max was vehemently against it. So maybe that came back to bite him. Who knows? But yeah, defending from Lando was great too. I don't necessarily know whether it was a particularly difficult defense for him to pull off at the end of the day. I don't think that Lando's challenges were particularly daunting. But yeah, no, it was a solid conversion. Just kept P2. This felt a little bit like a Monaco, didn't it? In that we had our starting order almost exactly match the finishing order, besides the controversial Lando move towards the beginning of the race, and that was about it. Sainz delivered Max P2. There he goes again, and both McLarens are behind him. So as soon as either of them, or maybe both of them, have an issue or a DNF, or perhaps even come together in the races yet to come, who knows? He will be picking up a solid handful of points as long as he can keep the consistency that none of us have any doubt he can. So yeah, all eyes on Max, and
Yeah.
that'll be that.
Yeah, lots to watch there. Definitely still in championship contention, which is good to see. Always keeps things interesting. Now, need to talk about Ferrari. Kind of a very weird weekend for them, to be honest with you, Lucas. I mean, I think that they looked quite fast throughout practice sessions, although I don't think there was ever really a question that they were going to be in contention for a race win. I mean, it really felt like they were nowhere to be seen throughout this race. Charles had a really good start, made up 2 places in that first lap, which was great. He took advantage of that. But then beyond that, there was no real improvement. Difficult race for Lewis Hamilton. You know, he had a good qualifying performance. They qualified his teammate as well. He had some pretty good speed in the last stint when he put on some new rubber, and he was obviously chasing Antonelli and holding off Alonso as well. But he had a brake issue as well, and he was hit with a 5-second penalty for track limits, so it went from bad to worse with him. We also heard Alonso getting very, very angry on the radio that he could spot Lewis's brake issue. He was saying, "I can see the sparks, there's an issue with his car, this is dangerous." Now, Lewis didn't receive any penalty for that. He obviously just received it for the track limits violation, which then actually conceded the place to Alonso at the end. So Lewis would have been finished 7th on the track and then finished 8th in the race standings at the end. But I mean, it's just what is happening at Ferrari. I mean, they're just so uncompetitive, and it's painful at this point. I mean, I don't think we'll expect any real different results from Ferrari throughout the next few races.
I think what's happening at Ferrari is a whole lot of nothing, and it's really sad to see. Yeah, Lewis's brake issue was really strange, actually. It was the front left. It looked like the brake pad sort of just disappeared and was replaced by a spark strip, which was a great amount of use. Still, despite that, to still finish P8 at the end of the day isn't, it's not terrible. We're still within the points. The track limits thing, I feel like once you have the first couple of incidents with realizing, oh, my braking distance is longer than it should be, you should sort of start to adjust to that and hopefully be able to avoid a track limits violation and 5-second penalty. But I guess Lewis just wasn't, was pushing too hard on hardware that just wasn't up to scratch. He clearly knew there was an issue and yet didn't quite adapt to it. I do understand Fernando's complaints in that it did look a little bit dangerous to be driving on essentially 3 brakes, and about 80% of the braking force under hard braking is done by the front axle of the car. So to lose a front brake disc is, pretty detrimental. But yeah, no, him pushing towards the end of the race was also impressive considering the condition of the car. But again, it's just Ferrari having to pick up the pieces at the end of the day, isn't it? I mean, I'm really sitting here trying to find plus points, as I'm sure is coming across quite well. But yeah, no, it's tragic, and it has been this way for quite a long time, and it's even more tragic that this has become the expected result of any Ferrari race, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think as well at this point, it's becoming evidently clear that, I mean, I really don't think there's much more the drivers can do in this situation. I mean, I think that the qualifying performance was where that car was. Lewis 6th, Charles 7th. And I mean, that's where that car is, really. I do believe that. And they were really, really struggling throughout the race. And it's just so painful to see them this like midfield defensive throughout the course of the last few races as well. Of course, look, they've snuck in a couple of podiums here and there. There has been kind of flashes of speed, but it just looks like they're not going to improve over the course of the next few races. And I mean, I know we discussed this, Lucas, that they'd been holding on to second in the Constructors. That's gap is now widening even more now that Russell has walked away with a race win, so it looks like Mercedes could be even sharper now to hold on to that. I think what was benefiting them for a while was that both of the drivers, Lewis and Charles, were both consistently scoring points pretty much every weekend. Whereas there was a few pitfalls with the other teams. There was a good few weekends where Kimi wasn't scoring against George. There was a good few weekends. There's been plenty of weekends where no one is scoring any other Red Bull points other than Max. Of course, the McLarens are the two consistently scoring ones, and that's why they've won the constructors. But that's potentially why they were able to hold on to P2 for so long. So, and I mean that speaks to the skill of the drivers. I think that they're still able to finish their races, deliver points. And yeah, there's been a few hairy moments, absolutely without a doubt. Charles has had a few bad races. Lewis has had a good few bad races as well. But it just feels at this point they need to get the car sorted, and they're not going to do that this year. I mean, Fred keeps talking about we're going to make improvements. I just don't see it. I just do not see it. And it just doesn't feel like they're making any push to kind of make the end of the season meaningful whatsoever. I mean, this is probably being very dismissive of them. I'm sure they will be doing plenty of work behind the scenes to try and get that car more competitive. But they also just seem clueless. They don't really seem to have any answers as to why the car. I mean, there's just a fundamental flaw in the design of that car this year, and they can't really change it now at this
I
point.
mean, they've been exactly where they've been for the last decade, which is distinctly average. I think Ferrari is at this point a midfield team. I think that's just it's just the way it is, man. I don't make the rules. I don't make the standings. That's entirely up to them. And what they've made is an upper midfield, lower top end car, and it's been that way since Fuelgate back in 2000 and God knows when, 18, 19 maybe. Yeah, it's rough. It's just rough. And yeah, Lewis is there because it's his dream, but his dream is not what it used to be. His dream is a Ferrari in the 90s, which was a hell of a time, man. And that time is no longer with us. And it's just quite sad to see. I've no idea how they're going to turn this around. I have every faith in Fred Vasseur. I don't know whether this has arisen from complacency, whether it's been just that they're Ferrari. They're arguably the biggest brand on the planet, and everybody loves them regardless of what they're doing. And they're Italian, and there's passion and there's joy. But at the end of the day, if there's anything we know about Italian cars, is that they're beautiful and they sound great, but God, they don't always work. And this is kind of what's happened to the Ferrari Formula One team. Granted, it's not as much of a reliability issue these days. They are reliably. It's just that they're reliable. It's just that they're reliably middling, and that's the way it is.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that they've kind of got on top of any sort of reliability issues that used to plague them over the last few years. But I think what's happened here is they had a design flaw that was exposed in China. They realized that ultimately they're going to have to sacrifice performance to not be disqualified from every race then after, basically. They've done that, and now they can only make the tiniest incremental gains. And I mean, look, at the end of the day, Formula One is at a point now where the difference between P1 and P10 in qualifying is literally, 2/10 at times. You know what I mean? It is so close between that top 10. And so those incremental gains just get harder and harder to make. It just does feel like there's a little bit of a rudderlessness going on this year as well compared to last year. While I agree that I have a lot of faith in Fred Vasseur, he really felt like a calming hand coming into Ferrari. And look, Ferrari have backed him, which is good for once. There has been so much chaos at that team over the years, and they're betting in, they're putting all their chips on Vasseur for the next few years, which is the right thing to do ultimately. The drivers back him too, so yeah, I think let's see what they can do the next few races. We have Austin next, which of course Ferrari won last year, and I highly doubt they'll be able to replicate that result this year. But let's see how they get on. It's a great track, and they're usually quite strong around there. But ultimately, it's going to be a battle to hold on to P3, I think, for Ferrari for the next few races. Now, Lucas, I just want to talk about some other standout performances from the weekend. I mean, first we can start with maybe Ollie Bearman potentially, if you want to run us through. I think it was a really, really impressive race from the young rookie, which I think he hasn't really gotten enough kind of airtime this year. There was a lot of hype around Ollie Bearman being on the grid this year because of how well he had done last year in his couple of stints with Haas and Ferrari. What did you think of his performance throughout the Singapore GP?
I think it was phenomenal. I think he pulled off arguably the most overtakes of the race and some of the best overtakes of the race. There was an incredible dive bomb. I think it was it on Gasly, where it was last minute and also completely squeaky clean, kept it entirely within the white lines, didn't have any contact with Gasly and came out the other end of it ahead and just held onto it, just made that car stick like nothing I've ever seen. Which was phenomenally impressive. Obviously, we had him being clipped by Hajar, and then coming back in the second stint to go straight past him again. Yeah, I mean, again, he's in a Haas, so it's never going to be a top contending car, but God, he can drive. And I think it's really quite vindicating for all of us who saw his debut with Ferrari back in, was it the Saudi Arabian
Saudi
Grand
GP,
Prix?
yeah, Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, and we thought, whoa, this guy's got some pace and some talent. And finally, well, not necessarily finally, because there have been hints of it over the last couple of years, but a lot of that talent has been actualized in this race, and we can see good results in a car that has no right to be as far up the grid as he finished. So props to him, and that was incredibly impressive.
Yeah, fantastic from Ollie Bearman. I mean, I really was excited to see what he would get up to this year. I think he did have some kind of iffy races as well last
Yeah,
year. I
of
mean,
course.
Interlagos wasn't great for him last year as well, but I mean, he wasn't a full-time Formula One driver too. I think what's been really impressive about him too with Haas is he's had a tough teammate to go up against. I think that Esteban Ocon is no slouch, and he's had the mark of him throughout the season. I think we probably haven't been paying a lot of attention to the back markers this season. It's just the reality of the way the season has gone a little bit. I think Haas can often be a little bit anonymous, but they actually haven't had a bad year overall. But Ollie Bearman has been the standout there. So, as you say, Lucas, really great to see. Really great qualifying performance, brilliant race performance. I mean, those overtakes, as you say, were so clean, so clinical, and also didn't lose his head when he had that little bump with Hajar. He just was like, I'm going to get my revenge on you. I'm going to get you back, and just completely could have thrown his toys out of the pram and gone mental, but he got his head down, finished P9. Excellent result from him. On to another rookie, Fernando Alonso. A fantastic performance from him in Singapore. And I mean, performance aside, I think his radio was potentially one of the most entertaining things that has come out of this weekend. He was very frustrated throughout the race. I think he was hit with a lot of trademark Fernando Alonso bad luck, but he still put in a cracking performance in the race. Obviously, as we mentioned earlier, he got very mad at Lewis Hamilton over his brake issue and had a very expletive filled radio message to his teammates, but he managed to still keep his cool and deliver a really good performance when honestly that Aston Martin, I mean, it did look quick with his hands over the weekend. I mean, I think he was fastest in FP1 at one point, which was great, but their pace did kind of fall off then throughout the weekend. I mean, he started P10 in the race, which was pretty solid. Finished the race then in P7, obviously after inheriting that place from Lewis Hamilton. He did put in a good charge as well against Lewis. I think it was a very good race from Alonso, and it just shows that he's still really capable of putting in these really great drives, even when things go wrong from like slow pit stops, etc. He just manages to keep his head down. I mean, this radio was reminiscent of some of his later McLaren years. No more radio on the race, which was
Yeah.
classic Fernando Alonso. But I think it was a really good performance from him.
Yeah, he's turned into a little bit of a Kimi Räikkönen lately, hasn't he? Which I do absolutely love. Granted, he does use a few more words than the good old Kimi did, but I think the term "wily" has been thrown around about Fernando, and no race has it been truer than this one we've just had. I reckon. Great overtake on Hajar, admittedly, when Hajar did have a bit of an engine problem. And a great defense from Isaac as well, which Fernando did remark on in his what was it, trophy for hero of the race comment. And yeah, the disconnecting the radio comment was also quite amusing. But yeah, really, really solid performance from Fernando Alonso. Ever since his return, we've been sort of amazed by how true to his old form he's managed to stay. I only hope that he stays at Aston for long enough to see some results from the Adrian Newey integration. Because if we put that man in a title contending car, God knows what's going to happen. And yeah, as usual, he's eclipsed Lance Stroll, who also had a few interesting radio messages of his own, though not all necessarily as warranted as Fernando's were. But yeah, no, great race for Fernando.
Yeah, I mean, to give credit to Stroll as well, he had a pretty poor qualifying performance and he really struggled throughout the race. But I mean, I don't think he actually had that bad a race. He actually made up a good few positions, finished P13. I mean, not brilliant. And when you see what Fernando can do with that car, it just sets him above the rest. But not a terrible race from Stroll. But I think I agree as well with Alonso. He's been very coy about how long he's going to stay in the sport. I mean, his stint with Aston Martin has had lots of ups and downs, and there's been really great highs there as well. And, you know, in that 23 season, it really felt like it was the start of something new. It was really exciting. I think that I would like him to stay as long as he can and as long as he's pulling in the performances because, I mean, he's a great character. He's a fantastic driver. He's really great to have around. And we know that Adrian Newey is dying to work with Alonso. He is really excited about working with Fernando Alonso as one of the drivers. So I think it'll be really interesting. And as you say, Lucas, I hope he gets to stick around and we see the benefit of that car next year. Now, last person I wanted to just talk about as well was Carlos Sainz. He's been on a really, really good kind of trajectory over the last few races. Obviously, on the back of that podium that he secured, he's been in kind of much more pep in his step, I think, with Williams after getting that podium. Obviously, it's been a very tough year for him. He's had lots of ups and downs, some his fault, some not his fault. And I think this weekend, started out, really difficult for Williams. They had an absolute mountain to climb. They felt that they had kind of underperformed in qualifying, so Carlos was already quite downbeat about their qualifying performance, and then they were both disqualified from qualifying, him and Alex Albon. So starting right at the back of the grid, and then Sainz manages to finish in the points. I mean, it was fantastic. He did a 50-lap stint on the medium, making it look like a hard tyre. I mean, he really managed that race really well. Did a late charge on the softs, and then finished in the points. I mean, great race from Carlos.
It was absolutely insane. I remember getting a decent ways through the race and how the timing board changes from positions to delta to interval and then to pit stops, and you see Carlos 0 all the way up in like P7. You go, hang on a minute, how's he managed to do that on mediums? Yeah, that's absolutely phenomenal from him. That's the kind of tire stretching performance that we're used to seeing from Lewis Hamilton in his prime. And to see him convert what is essentially a back end of the grid start into a points winning finish is genuinely amazing. Granted, it's not quite Checo in the dying throes of whatever they were called, Racing Point, Force India, or whatever they were called at the time, going from P20 all the way up to P1. But even still, to do so in Singapore, which is basically just a slightly darker Monaco, is phenomenally impressive. And I think that's going to be a really good accolade going forwards for him.
Yeah, and I think as well, tire management is something that teams really struggle with getting drivers to be absolutely at the top of their game with, and it can really make or break a race, as we can see. And if you have someone who can manage a stint like that, it's just such an asset to the team. And I mean, I've just been so pleased for Carlos over the course of the last few races. It's just been great to see him back in his kind of old ways where he's feeling positive, he's feeling confident about every race they're heading into every weekend. And I really think the next few races are going to bring a lot of opportunities for Williams as well. I think Austin will have plenty of opportunity for them to pull in a good result. It's a track that should suit their car. I think that Carlos as well showed that in a hot race as well, like Singapore, they can still pull in a good result with everything facing them, everything negative facing them completely. So I mean, Austin should be fantastic. Well, Lucas, that is it from us this week. We have no racing next week, so we'll return again for Austin I will get the dates here, on the 17th of October, free practice session in Austin, which will be a fantastic race. I'm sure it's always a lot of fun heading out to Texas for a race there. Should be some really, really interesting storylines, and we'll keep a close eye on the McLaren situation and any other breaking news that comes out over the next few weeks. But in the meantime, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Head over to crash.net to get all the latest Formula One news and analysis. And until then, keep it on the racing line.
It's all right.